Good afternoon. My topic is iron mining in the county of Tyrol. As you can see by the title of my presentation, Iron for the Empire, a closer look at the historic mining centers of the county of Tyrol. While Tyrol is known above all for its silver and copper deposits, and the mining district of Schwarz, where the so-called mother of all mines provided yields that seemed inexhaustible, one must not forget that the mining of iron also played an important role in the area. Today, I will give a short excursion into the history of Tyrolean iron mining in the Middle Ages and in the modern times. After that, I will present two of our main research areas, the mining center of Fügen in the Zillertal, which gradually developed into the most important mining of iron center in North Tyrol, and the iron mine at the Tabernitzkogel in the East Tyrolean Frosnitztal, which is located at an extreme altitude of 2,500 to 2,800 meters. In the literature, we can find references to iron mining already for prehistoric times. However, these mines are only speculative and are not yet proven by our archaeological findings. These are a possible mine near Reute on the Säuling, which you can see on the left, the early Schwarzer mining center, where iron could be accumulated as a byproduct in the middle, and the Kelchalpe near Kitzbühel, where again copper was mined, but iron deposits are also detectable. For the early Middle Ages, we can note a mention of iron mines and a smelting furnace in Fornace in Trentino from the year 845 onwards. In the High Middle Ages, there was an increase in the number of iron mines in South Tyrol. In the late Middle Ages, however, North Tyrol becomes more and more the focus of attention. This trend continues in the early modern period. The late modern period is characterized above all by a continued use of old mines, fewer expansions, with the exception in the southwest of the Trentino, and an increasingly strong competition between the mines of Tyrol and those of Inner Austria. So here you can see the crosses represent smelteries or iron furnaces. In the whole area of Old Tyrol, a total of 140 iron mines can be identified, in addition to numerous mining operations, such as 50 localized smelting furnaces, and the heyday of iron mining in Tyrol was in the 16th and 17th century. In this heyday of iron mining, one area stands out, as already mentioned, the mining area around Fügen in the Zillertal. The mining area of Fügen used to be a part of the world-famous mining district of Schwarz. The first reference to ore mining, specifically iron mining, are recorded for 1404 in a document that granted free persons equal rights on the so-called La Marque. This marks the beginning of an iron history, of a mining history in the region that was to last until the end of the 19th century. Over the centuries, further mines followed in the Öxl Valley and on the Schwader. In numerous tunnels, mainly spar iron was mined, and the operation gradually gained in importance until it is mentioned as the main iron extraction site in Tyrol from the middle of the 16th century. The 1,500 tons of spar iron mined annually, even after its heyday, testifies to the enormous quantities of iron mined in this mining district. The mined ores had an iron content of 28%, but were inferior in quality to other iron deposits, especially those mined in Leoben, but more on that later. In its heyday, 500 people were employed by the companies in the Fügen mining district. In addition to the miners, There were also sammers, backpullers, carters, lumberjacks, charcoal burners, smelters, blacksmiths, administrators, etc., etc. The miners carried out their daily work in the tunnels using the so-called Schräm method, where they used hammers and iron and achieved an advance of 0.5 centimeters per day, with an usual working time of 48 weeks per year. A final advance of 1.5 meters per miner per year can be calculated. This hard labor was paid at the rate of 1 gulden per week. Miners in general in Tyrol also enjoyed a number of privileges to keep the valuable workers happy. In contrast to the majority of the population, miners in the Middle Ages were already free and not subject to a landlord. They were not subject to a judge, had their own mining court, were free of custom duties, tolls, exempt from military service. They also had advantages in everyday life, such as the right of first refusal on offered goods. Once the ore had been extracted, it had to be brought down into the valley for further processing. This was particularly arduous and a dangerous work. In early winter, as soon as there was enough snow, the so-called sack pullers brought the ore sacks down from the mountain using sledges. Each sack of iron weighed about 60 kilograms and was made out of a fabric and sow skins. The sack pullers were mostly farmers' sons who wanted to earn extra money. It was a very well-paid job, but also very, very dangerous, and it was not uncommon to have terrible accidents. Once in the valley, the ore was transported in wagons to the smelters. The empty sacks were then dragged up the mountain by dogs, as you can see in the picture. As already mentioned, Fügen emerged from the middle of the 16th century as the main place of iron extraction and processing in Tyrol. In 1557, a so-called pleuofen, an iron blast furnace, and a smelter for silver mining already existed there. In 1596, an ironworks on the Finsingbach stream, 2 blast furnaces, and a hammer mill on Kleinboden were in operation. The hammer mill supplied the Haller Salzhaus with salt pans, the Schwarzer mines with iron equipment, and, of particular interest, also the Innsbruck armory. From Kleinboden, armor plates were delivered to the great armorers, and cannonballs were transported to the provincial capital from there. As already mentioned, the quality of Fügen iron was inferior to that of Leoben iron, which was preferred at the time. Salt pans and cannons made from it only had half the lifespan of their Leoben counterparts. But it had one big advantage: it was cheaper than the Styrian iron due to having savings on the transportation. Even though it was cheaper, there were always big problems due to outstanding payments from the mines in Hall and Schwarz. In some cases, some thousands of gulden were owed to the Zillertal Union for years. We can read about several orders from Schwarz and Hall, which were answered from the Zillertal side with letters containing only 2 words: pay first. There was great discontent among the tradesmen and miners in Zillertal, especially because of a lack of payment, failing food deliveries, and disputes ran back and forth and ended in non-deliveries, strikes, and finally the Innsbruck court had to intervene as an arbitrator of disputes. The Bavarians also obtained iron from Kleinboden, and they were more popular as business partners because they did not pay as carelessly as the Tyroleans. The cannonballs produced in Kleinboden also were not only used for national defense, as old records show. In 1615, it is mentioned that the government from Innsbruck sent a trusted person to the border at Rattenberg to target what seems to be a common trade of cannonballs to Bavaria. Whether the smuggle could be stopped, it is not mentioned. An independent settlement gradually formed around the hammer mill and the other mining operations. Up to 300 people found work in the enterprises settled in Kleinboden. Today, the remains of the iron and hammer mill from this period are still preserved in Kleinboden. The ruins are mostly notable for their distinctive pointed arches and window arches and doors. Parts of the plant was still used up until the end of the 20th century, and there they produced mainly winches for material ropeways. While the working conditions and especially the transport from the mining areas around Fügen were already extremely arduous, we can come now to a mining area that, due to its remoteness, is probably one of the most inhospitable in all of Tyrol, the mining center of Frosnitz. On the Tabernitzkogel in the Frosnitztal, the archbishops of Salzburg established a mining site for iron ore around 1300. They held this mining right until 1567. In the 1620s, the Glauret tradesmen from the Wirgen Valley began to revive the mining operation. Shortly thereafter, the tradesmen from St. Jakob in Defregen took over. But again, they only defied the elements on the Tabernitzkogel for about 2 years. In 1845, mining was revived once again for 10 years, while in the 17th century it was mainly the high taxes that had caused the abandonment of the area. In the 19th century, it was really the remoteness of the mining district that was given as the reason. And it is almost impossible to imagine a more isolated mining area. Mining took place at an altitude of 2,000 to 2,800 meters. Here you have some details for the ascent. If you want to make it yourself, you start at the Gruben hamlet, then you pass the Katallalm until you reach the mining district at the Tabernitzkogel. Even if you are an experienced hiker, you will have to factor in a minimum walking time of 6 to 7 hours, and you traverse an altitude of 2,200 to 2,500 meters. Here we have a profile of all altitude levels. You can see slope levels of up to 40% are not uncommon on the path leading up the mountain. After about 6 kilometers, you reach a still preserved miners pathway that starts at 2,157 meters above sea level and takes you up to the miners' hut, which is located at 2,500 meters. This miners' path has a constant width of about 1.5 to 2 meters, and unlike the rest of the ascent, has a pleasant flat slope of just under 10%. The path is dry-walled, which you can see here a little better. It is also sometimes carved into the rock, or rocks have been removed. It is equipped with some makeshift bridges. And once you have reached the mining area, here you can see our 2 main research areas for our surveys. We made one in 2020 and one only last week, 2 weeks ago. Let's start looking at the one further up the mountain. Here we can find a lot of traces of mining, stockpiles, and a shelter under an overhanging rock. Here you can see me standing beside a stockpile, and in the back there is a big rock which was used as a shelter, possibly by the miners, nearly certainly by people of the Neolithic era, because when we walked up the mountain we found traces of Neolithic silex blades. Another picture of the big rock, and you can also see it was laid out with stone slabs, so you had a very flat and dry ground where you could rest. Some other stockpiles, and the picture down on the right, you can see some traces of mining still on the rock itself. The second mining area stretches up the mountainside, and again, one repeatedly encounters mining traces. These include direct mining, coarse preparation, stockpiles, deposits, and finally, the miner's hut. Mining could be carried out directly above ground on large ore deposits reaching the surface. To do this, the ground around them was simply deepened and the ore rock was removed in slabs. These slabs then were further ground down directly on site in several stages. In this picture, you can see the whole process. First, you see the stone, then the first rough slabs, and different stages of ground down ore. There are also numerous pits in the area that indicate completely removed boulders. It is said that there were also 2 mines leading into the mountain, into the Bernitskogel, but in 2 surveys we could not discover them. The ground down ore was stored in stockpiles around the buildings and then transported to the valley in the winter. Then we come to the miner's hut. The miner's hut, whose foundation have been preserved, dates back to the 17th century, with some alterations made in the 19th century. You have a view from above, from our drone, and interpretation of us for the use of the different rooms. So you can have a clear entrance, possibly a kitchen on the left side, a vestibule or entrance hall, and a big recreation and bedroom for all the miners. In the immediate vicinity, there are numerous ore stockpiles and also a more modern building that nowadays provides shelter for some sheep. This building probably stands on an old temporary storage site. One can clearly see how the miner's path here in red runs along this site and how the ore could be stored here for further transport. Here you have a really beautiful view from the mountain. And now we come to the ore processing. The iron was then smelted in Gruben, a small hamlet that lies at the entrance of the valley. Beautiful vista down to Gruben. There, in addition to an old pathway here in yellow, we could discover numerous ruins in a small forest, which could perhaps indicate the smelting furnaces. Here you have a view of the small hamlet Gruben and of the remains of the ruins in the forest. In addition to these buildings, there could also have been water-operated hammer mills, because we found traces of an old water channel in the area. The iron from Frosnitz is magnetite with some pyrite and chalcopyrite, with an average iron content of 65%. Ore analysis from 1648 tells us 100 weight of ore yielded 40% of pig iron or 41% of wrought iron. This very high iron content, combined with the possibility to mine iron above ground and not in mines, seems to be what made the mining district of Frosnitz so popular. Thank you for your attention, and as the miners would say, Glück auf.
Glück auf. Glück auf vuol dire, è un proverbio tedesco, che vuol dire, se mi ricordo bene, esci e porta a casa un tesoro, però salva la vita. Non lo so. più o meno. E a Feltre è stata trovata una lucerna tirolese, da minatore tirolese, con su la scritta Gluckauf della cosa. Grazie per l'esposizione, grazie per averci ricordato che il Tirolo non sono solo le miniere di Schwarz, anche se l'argento ha fatto ricco i Fugger, ha fatto ricco il conte del Tirolo, il Asburgo dopo, perché diciamo, è stato fondamentale in un periodo della storia molto, molto preciso. Il ferro, io penso che la situazione probabilmente è ancora più complessa. Mi viene in mente che nella relazione di Marin Sanudo a seguito dei Savi terraferma alla fine del 400, quando visita le miniere a Gordine, dice che sono condotte per Sbeucher Teutonicus, lo chiama lui, per cui è un maestro minatore evidentemente tedesco. E l'altra cosa che mi viene in mente sono le asce cerimoniali, cosiddette asce bavaresi, che sono asce cerimoniali da confraternita di minatori, trovate a Zenic e conservate in una collezione privata adesso. Sono 5 o 6 asce meravigliose, completamente istoriate, e che chiaramente denotano la presenza di minatori tirolesi anche al di qua del confine e in periodo veneziano della cosa. Molte grazie.
Sì.